In the mid-30s, the architect Robert Dira was invited into the office of the owner of the Southern California Coca Cola bottling company. It's owned by a guy called Stanley. And he goes into Stanley's office and he's sitting there waiting for Stanley to come in. He's looking at the wall and there's a whole wall covered in pictures of boats. And so Dira has an idea. He goes, I know what I'm going to do. He wants this new building. I'll design it to look like a boat. But actually, it's a cleverer building than that, because what this was originally was a series of 4 separate, distinct buildings that were trying to be made to work as a single bottling plant. And all he's done is skinned those existing buildings with this outside facade and given it a certain amount of pizzazz and showbiz. In so many ways, this building is a quintessential Los Angeles piece of architecture. Here we go, back onto Wilshire, back towards the ocean. Of course, there is a slight danger of trying to do a tour of a city in a car while you're driving, in that you end up staring at the buildings too much. Not looking at the road. I suppose it's an occupational hazard, really. Now, we're just passing into an area called Hancock Park, and I'm just going to swing off Wilshire again and drive through this part of town, because it was built in the 1920s by another oil magnate called Hancock. But it was an area designed for wealthy people to build these huge houses, whether it was East Coast money or new money in the city. And architecturally, it's like a very eclectic part of the world where people just built whatever style took their fancy. Tudor Revival here, half timbered and brick, kind of Italianate almost, that one. Pueblo, sort of Spanish style. Wow, that's like the Breakers, that's very East Coast. Good old American plantation house. I mean, it's all here. It's like a sweet shop of architecture. And what's interesting is in this part of the town, people were very much looking outside of LA for their cultural cues. They were looking either to the East Coast or even further to Europe. But in another part of town, all of that was changing. In the hills east of Hollywood, centered around a man-made reservoir, the Silverlake neighborhood attracted wealthy bohemians who commissioned houses from avant-garde young architects of the modernist movement. Richard Neutra was one of these innovators.
This is where you really understand what Neutra's trying to do with space and light.
This is great, isn't it?
Well, Neutra is one of the 3 people who kind of kicked off this style in Los Angeles. First, Frank Lloyd Wright was here in about 1905, 1906. Rudolf Schindler emigrated from Vienna in 1922, built his own house. Neutra came 3 years after. 2 things are different today than they were in 1932. The lake came all the way much, much closer, and the rooftop that's right in front of you was flooded with water. What his big revelation is that our cognitive systems are based on our genetic ancestry on the savannas of East Africa.
So it's evolutionary psychology, effectively, isn't it?
Yes.
It's early days of evolutionary psychology.
Yes, absolutely. They become one shining...
Wow, so water on the roof, straight out onto the lake.
Yes, and he said, if we can respond to our body physiologically and psychologically to that ancient Homo sapien, deep, deep, deep within us, then we're going to have an architecture that really resonates with us emotionally, physically, psychologically, all those ways. You know, this was supposed to be a sanctuary, a very quiet space. It doesn't really have a function per se.
So in a way, it's almost the ultimate LA space, just hanging out, checking out the sun, just kicking back.
Out and kicking back and having a place to do that.
That's great. It's wonderful.